Good morning, good evening, wherever you might be tuning in from, a very warm welcome. I would like to thank UNODC for providing this side event platform, and let me quickly introduce myself. I'm the founder and the chair of Women Without Borders, headquartered in Vienna. We are here today to talk about the role we can and we play in challenging the ongoing repression and exclusion of women around the world, fueled by war and extremist ideologies that target girls and women. Despite everyday experiences of violence, women are at the forefront, demonstrating courage and endurance, often at the risk of their lives. The setback of women's rights and freedoms are destabilizing factors in any society. The international community has the power and the responsibility to unlock mechanisms that challenge the rule of strong men, autocrats or warlords who invade and terrorize their countries. The question remains, does the international community have the will to stand up for the human rights of women today and every day? What is at stake beyond the moral responsibility is trust in democracy and in our universal value system. No army can forever silence women standing up for their freedoms of movement and expression. Gender apartheid and segregation are putting our fragile world order at risk. It must not be normalized under political pressure. Let us remember, women are targeted in times of war and conflict. There's an arsenal of gender-based tools ranging from rape to humiliation. But we must recognize women beyond victims, beyond being victims. We must equally see and support their agency as change makers and security allies. Women's rights are not a feminist fantasy, but a cornerstone of any stable society. Women must be acknowledged as peace builders in their local communities and at higher level negotiating tables alike. Respect of women's rights everywhere is a stress test for our democracies. So we have three trailblazers with us here today who come from different conflict theaters in ensuring that women are not reduced to collateral damage in the face of war and terror. And without further ado, we will now have the privilege to hear our first speaker. Dr. Ozala Nemad is Research Associate at SOAS in London. She's an Afghan scholar and civil society activist. She briefly served as an Afghan President's advisor on local governance and then led the Afghan think tank Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit. Ozala provides regular analysis in the media and informs academic discussion on conflict, development, and gender. A very warm welcome to you, Ozala, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Madam Schaffler. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It's a great honor and pleasure to be joining you. I have to start with apologizing with the background noise, and as just I start my speak, we have a beautiful crying of a child at the background. So forgive me if you have the background noise. I am just traveling, and this is also one reality of our life as people who have who come from countries where recognition is a difficulty and getting visas and mobility is not in our hand. It's basically in the hand of those who decide about us. So it's a great honor and pleasure to be with all of you and join this very important and timely event. I'd like to also convey my thanks to the Women Without Border, as well as the UNODC Commission on Crime and Prevention and Criminal Justice to provide this platform for us to speak and bring in the experiences, the concerns and the perspectives from countries that are in deep conflict and with worrying situations. The part of the discussion that I am going to have is focusing on Afghan women's resistance and resilience. Since August last year, Afghanistan experienced a major shift in the history. From a development point of view or perspective, there has been a sudden and complete collapse of the two key dimensions. The immediate closure of all major development and infrastructure projects and programs, and the collapse of the banking system that did not only affected those who rely on development assistance, but also any single household who depended on civil service salaries, small and medium enterprises, or even simple trading and services and small businesses. Everyone was affected by these major changes in the country at different levels. But these changes directly affected most of the population. Specifically, women and children became the worst affected throughout this process, as being the most vulnerable members or parts of the society. Many hospitals have since been closed, and secondary and high schools for girls has never been opened following the COVID crisis. Remember, due to COVID, we've had a massive closure of the educational centers, and we were just coming out of the strong wave of COVID last August when the country basically the regime change happened, and since then the schools for secondary and high schools has never been open. Already, also this already affecting the young students. Millions of people lost their jobs in the working force, and those who are still having their jobs, they don't have secure salaries on regular basis. The UN agencies launched as huge as $5 billion appeal to feed over 22 million in need of basic services such as food security, health, education, and jobs in the country, and 5.7 million population of Afghanistan requiring similar needs beyond its borders. The appeal, as it's said by some, is one of the largest appeals in the UN history to talk about. The larger picture of the post-August 2021 Afghanistan is filled with a strong humanitarian message from the UN and international agencies, alarming about severe level of poverty, starvation, massive migration due to both mentioned reasons, as well as fear of prosecution by the ruling regime. Responses to these calls have always been financial commitments by international donors. We have events in which commitments are being announced. However, on the operational part, there is major concerns with this approach in terms of accountability, the role that the civil society, the Afghan civil society in this case, could play and whether humanitarian aid alone is really addressing the massive needs of the country or not. The focus of today's discussion is mostly on women's resilience and resistance. So before I talk about the examples of resilience and resistance, I just want to remind ourselves of what we really mean by resilience and resistance. Resilience in the physical sciences, I'm sure everyone knows, means mostly the ability to spring back to the shape or elasticity. And we use this here to convey a meaning that refers to the capacity of women specifically to recover from a very tough and hard situation. And at the same time, maintain the strength in the worst conditions. By resistance, however, we do not necessarily mean the resistance that is armed or partisan, but rather we talk about the non-violent forms of resistance that is quite more powerful, quite significantly powerful, as we've seen revealing in the country in the last nearly 10 months or 9 months. The resistance through protesting their disagreements, for example, on the oppressive rules and dominations. Both men and women show different forms of resistance and resilience in each aspect of socio-economic and socio-political life in today's Afghanistan. The key point here is to acknowledge that and to highlight basically the agency of people living in such challenging conditions. Before I talk further about concrete examples of resistance and resilience, I want to also draw the attention of the respected audience on what we mean by civil society in the current context of Afghanistan. Very quick background: civil society organizations are progressive part of the society that aims to bridge between people and the state and the markets. Historically, in Afghanistan in the 19th century, religious scholars were a dynamic part of the civil society. We can see how things change as we move on in the history through different phases. In the contemporary context, during the first 2 decades of the Afghan wars, we talk about the 1980s and 1990s, the NGOs, funded mostly by Western donors, filled the place of civil society, and even in some instances, also filled the place of the state in terms of delivering services. In the post-2001 context, however, the Afghan civil society evolved as an amalgamated form of classic and modern civil society and formed a sector that played an important role in the development and advancement of Afghanistan over 2 decades. Women in the civil society specifically emerged as the most vocal, most dedicated and active members of the Afghan civil society in mobilizing people around rights, awareness, civic education, economic empowerment, political participation at different levels, from the villages all the way throughout the country and national levels. Community development organizations or community development councils, community-based organizations, women local councils for peace, religious and local traditional councils, unions, civil society, cultural organizations, religious organizations, and academic institutions all represent a diverse nature of the Afghan civil society. So for me, it's very important to at least present what do we mean by civil society, because there's always a misconception that civil society is donor-funded projects. Once they disappear, then it's everything is stopped. With last August changes, there is indeed a grave concern about the future of the civil society in Afghanistan. But as an organic and dynamic part of the society, the Afghan CSO members continue to evolve and play an important role in offering the support to their people. So things have not completely disappeared. That's what I try to sort of communicate here. What is already evident in the past 9 months is people's active mobilization at the community level, demanding more schools and clinics, asking for girls' secondary and high schools to be opened. This is happening in the rural as well as urban areas. And women taking the streets asking for basic rights such as food, jobs, and freedom. Their famous slogan is "Non Kar Azadi," which means literally these: food, jobs, and freedom. And the continuation of these activities is a clear indication that the Afghan civil society is active despite challenges and deserve key attention in bringing them into much more active participation in Afghanistan's future of development and advancement. Despite bans on secondary and high schools, in some provinces, we witness girls continue to go to high schools and secondary schools. Very few, actually, provinces or cities, or even areas within the cities, because some of the cities are large indeed. Following the most recent decree by authorities on women covering their faces, some young and educated women appear on media very cool-heartedly, commenting on such perspectives being individual to some groups and not an Islamic principle. I specifically have this specific case in mind, who I heard through media saying that Afghan women were already observing Islamic rules and are well aware of their rights and obligations. PinPath, as a youth volunteer organizations promoting girls' education and the rights of the rural population to have schools, is another great example to highlight how life and activism have not shut down in Afghanistan, but taken different shapes, and that we need to acknowledge that. PinPath is a volunteer group, and the most recent initiative by this youth volunteer group is to build mobile schools and libraries, put them behind a small rickshaw, as we call, or a zaranj, which is a small size motorbike with a back of a car, a solar on the top, and carrying basically a school to the villages, to the deprived population, girls and boys. Finally, it's important to note that what needs to be done as we move on. And here I share a number of key recommendations. International community, as mentioned also by the distinguished organizers, needs to really not surrender to unjustifiable restrictions and rules by the authorities against women in any country. International donors and aid agencies must get a better understanding of the local organic civil society with the knowledge of their capabilities to ensure they are engaged as active part of the future of Afghanistan. Women who have been active members of civil society across the country need to be engaged in humanitarian need assessment and also in its planning. The issue of downward accountability should be given as much importance as upward accountability. Traditional aid agencies or UN basically focus most of their accountability mechanism towards donors and less towards the communities. We would like to see that change, at least in the case of Afghanistan. The Afghan civil societies, including women, local organizations or groups, can play an important role in ensuring that such accountability happens at different levels. A call also on all donors and assistance providers that humanitarian aid on its own is not a long-term solution. We are indeed living in a crisis situation, but by feeding people on a daily basis, we are not going to reach anywhere. There needs to be more possibilities and opportunities that allow us to go beyond humanitarian approach, or at least start immediately with a humanitarian plus, which means bring in some development long-term programs and projects that serves the immediate needs of people and also to help them to stand on their own feet. I conclude my statement with a very brief comments that I made 8 years ago, that the struggle for women's rights in Afghanistan did not begin with the arrival of the international community, and it will not end. And I will not say it will not end now, as we are 1 year after the end. I would say it has not ended last August. The struggle continues. It takes different shape indeed, but it's very important, and a call on all international humanists and international women and women as well as men to share their solidarity and support to the cause of women's rights in Afghanistan or other countries that are suffering from the same challenges. Thank you very much for your attention. And once again, apologize for the background noise. Nice to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Osala. Thank you very much. You gave us such a nuanced insight into what is going on in Afghanistan. This is so important. And I think what I take away just instantly is that there is constructive dissent on the ground, and we need to hear, we need to listen, and we have to support these voices of dissent who try to keep civil society going, and women obviously play an important role at the civil society level. Thank you so much for your remarks and for your presentation. I would like now to move to our next speaker, Nadia, Dr. Nadia Al-Sakaf from Yemen. Nadia was the first appointed Minister of Information in Yemen, and before that was chief editor of the country's first English language newspaper. And Nadia, I remember we met many, many years ago, and I met you first time in the newsroom, which was a very male environment, but you strongly kind of made a presence there, and you were a true change maker. So Nadia is currently the research director of Arabia Brain Trust, the Yemeni-led think tank advocating for innovative academic solutions based in London. Nadia is also running a community radio in Aden. So welcome, Nadia. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Edith, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm so delighted that we have 60 amazing listeners and speakers for coming together for this event. And I always hats off to Edith and Wono that border for bringing amazing women, such high profiles. I agree with everything that Ozana said, and you must have seen me nodding and saying yes, yes. It's nice to feel that we are on the same page and sort of solidarity. The situation between Afghanistan and Yemen has many similarities, but also there are differences. But let me just take you one step back and tell you, like, on the larger global level, that 23% of the world lives in fragile contexts. So that's around a third of the world is living in sort of a form of instability. But when you go to check in terms of women, 75% of these women, of the women in these countries, live in extreme poverty. So 75%, that's 2/3. So how does it happen that when it comes to instability and fragile context, women have to share the highest burden? And now let's take you in terms of development and aid and the support that the international community provides to these fragile contexts. Only 6% goes to empowering women. Even though 75% of the women are in extreme poverty, only 6% goes to empowering women. And from this, the 6%, only 0.4 goes directly to women organizations. So, like, just looking at the numbers, you see that there is a problem. There is a problem in the approach towards supporting women, towards enabling the societies that suffer the most and the groups in the community that suffer the most. So this is at the national or not national, international context. But like, and this is the case despite that in 2000, we all signed, we signed the 1325 agreement for women, peace and security. So there is some reference, and since then 9 other resolutions have been passed and signed or ratified by different countries. So yet only 51% of the world has what we call the national action plans to implement this resolution, and only 36% have budgets. So even some countries have plans, but they don't put budget behind the plans. So this goes to show how serious. So my point from these numbers is that it seems to me, as an academic, as a researcher, that the countries are not serious about taking women in peace and security and their role and them as partners, as equal partners. And this has to change. So I'm calling on you, each in their own country, go back and check, does your country have a national action plan? Is the national action plan budgeted? Is it implemented? Is there accountability? Are there accountability measures, and so on? Now, going to Yemen, unfortunately, my country is one of the worst countries in the world for women. And this is not just because of media reports that report this, but also the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index says that Yemen is the worst ranking in the world. And this also needs to change. But as Ursula was saying, most of the funding towards women comes from the international, it's from the outside looking in. And while we appreciate that this helps, because otherwise our governments don't care about women, unfortunately, whatever authorities. So it has to come from the outside and the civil society. But even the international intervention is very isolated. So you have different organizations working maybe sometimes on the same thing, duplication, or they look at a very small thing and they think, okay, we've changed the situation for women in peace and security, whereas they didn't. Like, for example, a very quick example is cash support. So they give women, for example, cash in return of for work, but they don't change the dynamics within the family. And then so the woman that works gives the money when she arrives home to her husband. So yes, you gave her a source of income, but you didn't change the power balance in the family, and so you didn't really do much. And so, in fact, she works outside and she works inside now. So, like, we have to think about the whole ecosystem, or what we call. Also, there's no documentation. I mean, we have a memory of a fish. We don't follow what's going on. We don't document. We don't learn from the lessons, and also the international organizations don't talk to each other. So there is a huge, and I believe that women organizations, especially the ones on the ground, are the memory. So we have to have an interactive process with these women organizations, and the projects need to be done interactively. We have to ask the communities, what do you need from your point of view? What are your priorities? And then we design projects or interventions. Today, the situation of Yemeni women is horrifying, especially in areas controlled by the Houthis. Because, for example, the mobility, can you believe that a woman has to travel from one city to the other? She has to get the consent of the guardian, a written consent of the guardian. This has not been before in the case of Yemen. And also, like, there's a woman model. She's a fashion designer. She's imprisoned just because she likes fashion and she models. There is a document issued by the Houthis in September 2021, preventing girls from carrying smartphones and wearing makeup in events. There is also a document that says that women cannot have the freedom to exercise activism or, you know, get into events. In fact, women now in so many regions in the north are just being hushed because they're afraid for their lives, because now they are in prison, they're detained. I myself have a death sentence on my name. I'm talking to you now, and there is a death sentence in Sana'a saying that if I go back, I will be killed. So just because of my activism and my outspokenness. I'm sorry, it's too personal, but at the same time, you can relate. It's happening in different countries, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, even in Latin America. So what can we do now that we think about it? There's the problem of women. There's the resilience that also was talking about civil society. We were there before the international community, and we will stay because this is our plight. But what can you do? Spread the word. Direct support should be given towards women organizations. We are at the front line, peacemakers. We are humanitarian aid givers. And when Corona was happening in Yemen, it was the female doctors that were brave enough to help the male doctors. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm anti. I love men. I have a very nice husband and all of that. But like, I don't know what it is that we have in our genes, amazing power that make us, when there's a test of time, we go, we deliver. And so they were there. We need to change the narrative on Yemen and say, look at these powerful, amazing women, support these women organizations directly and hold the culprits accountable. It has to be, we can't just like turn a deaf ear, a blind eye and say, no, we look the different way just because we don't want to spoil our relationships with whatever who's in power in a certain place. So I'm ending here. I hope I managed to convey a little bit of what's going on, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I mean, this was the perfect, sadly, the perfect continuation of the remarks we heard from Ursula. You know, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it's Yemen, and there are other places across the globe where women peacemakers, defenders of human rights, women's rights are under attack, and they actually do their work at the risk of their lives. I mean, this is incredible bravery. And I think this must be acknowledged, not only by the international community, by each and every one of us. You know, we also have to turn into peace activists everywhere. I think this is our moment as women activists, peace activists. We can't look up all the time for the leaders. We have to lead. And this is resonated so well with me from your speech and also from Ursula's speech. You know, women are at the forefront. Women need just the support. They show the capacity, the passion, the ability to do it, to get the job done. So you gave both many examples. I think there's no further comment necessary. Your voices need to travel, need to be heard. And we, all of us listening in today, we are part of this. You know, it's not the leaders at the UN and political levels and country levels. It is us. I think we have to start at home, where peace actually does start and where conflict starts at home, at the home front. So I hope, thanks again to both of you. And I do hope that Maria.
I'm here.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have the pleasure now to welcome Maria Yanova. Maria Yanova is the member of the Committee of Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Maria is the co-founder of the NGO Ukrainian Women's Congress, an NGO promoting principles of gender equality and defining the gender policy agenda for the Ukrainian parliament across sectors. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for previous speakers, as we really now under very huge pressure and attacks, and unfortunately in Ukraine now there is a war, an open war, Russia against not only Ukraine, but it's one dictatorship against democracy, against all free world. And that is why it is so important that only together we can win, because since Russia has attacked Ukraine since 24th of February illegally and without any provocation, we saw how immediately Ukrainian movement joined the national defense efforts and started to withstand the aggressor on different levels. I can tell you that evaluated the Ministry of Defense, now the percentage of women in the armed forces of Ukraine is 18%. First of all, of course, this result is not only like nowadays and a few months. Of course, this result we have succeeded starting from 2014, and also thankfully to our civil society organizations, thankfully to Equal Opportunity Caucus in the parliament, and of course thankfully to our organization as Ukrainian Women Congress. I really would like to underline it, because I think that such movement of volunteers, of defenders, we have exclusive, if I can say, our nationality, what we are doing now in different levels. And I'd like to say that it's also, this corresponds to the best world practices and has become possible really after we have done a huge legislative and advocacy job. And during the war, women together with men are standing on the lines, on fire, perform military tasks in the armed forces of Ukraine and territorial defense. And we also see how active women on occupied territories, but so it's not only on liberated and in armed forces and security defense, but also how do they active on occupied territories. Also many women, writers, artists, musicians, hairdressers, teachers, women of other many professions and different ages, including retirees. They are doing their best to bring victory and to win, because we see, for example, how do they weave the camouflage nets, they help refugees, they prepare food for defenders, they transport products and medicines provided by partner countries abroad, because according to our legislation, men after 60 years they are not allowed to leave our country, and that is why women are driving trucks, buses, and they bring this humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And also they prepare Molotov cocktails for defense against the enemy, and they also are very active in translation news from Ukraine for foreign media and more. So despite the challenges and despite all that strategy and also problems in the operational activity during the war, the national and especially local women's organizations in Ukraine remain in the country, and they are really very operative. They're very effective. They are learning really learning on their experience in peaceful time. They also reached many groups of women, including vulnerable, to identify also their needs. Example, I can say that the impressive really example of those activity is a security area, an activity of women's veterans movement that has deployed a rapid reaction headquarters supporting both military and civic women. So how to say that women's organization, which we were working more on legislation level, more on practical, on our also national action plan 1325 on the local level. But now, of course, we see the results, how unfortunately on the practical way they are doing. Also, I'd like to say regarding the role, active area role of women's organizations and initiatives, that they has become possible due to the many years, as I mentioned, the very constructive activity of the women movement in Ukraine. So we have this networking job, and the efforts also of the parliament has become efficient, as a lot of MPs, there are a few during a few convocations, they demonstrated really unity, being in different political parties, and ensured passing the key legislative initiatives. Of course, we were working on security sector. We were working on quotas, on the lifting of the restrictions for women for serving in the armed forces, and of course also education, because we opened education university of the military academies, as well as expanding the list of positions for women in the army. So regarding the war, of course, the number of refugees reaching more than 6 million people, and 90% of refugees from Ukraine are women and children. And women in Ukraine are at increased risk, of course, of gender-based violence, including rape, harassment, and sexual exploitation. It's also now what we are calling the world because of occupied territories. Russian soldiers, they massacred civilians in Ukraine. They bombed civilians targets in Mariupol, Kharkov, Chernigiv. Sexual violations was massive. It was municipal leaders were abducted, tortured, and refugees were forcibly deported to camps in Russia, especially to Sibir, more deep to Russia, where Russians think that we will not find our people. And the Ukrainian Women's Congress conducted a survey on the situation of women during Russia's war against Ukraine. And this study really helped to quickly reach women from different regions of Ukraine to understand the circumstances in which they are, also what are their urgent needs and requests. And the survey conducted in March, April 2022 helped really, to summarize the key trends already emerging in the context of the situation of women facing the challenges of war. And the key problems for women in this regard are the direct threat to their lives, as a result of, also there's bombardings, also mass evacuations, resettlement of internally displaced persons. We are now almost 10 million IDPs in our country, and their deterioration of their psychological state. Key assistance needed by women, it's of course finding new housing, closing basic needs, strengthening economic capacity, and expert and psychological assistance. Also, I can say that women, they, demonstrate leadership, and I'd like to underline it because we also have in the government very active women who are taking care of prisoners and hostages. We have leaders on the ground, and those in civilian and military matters. These women are really leaders because they self-organizations and coordinations also with the local self-governments. They are working very close contacts. Also, women's organizations are self-organized and operational, but efforts to overcome the challenges of war are really often combined on the ground of local level. So it is very important to recognize, encourage, and support the role of women during the war. And of course, after the victory, to create real opportunities for women to make all decisions, because now they even do not have this instruments, but of course they influence, and they're playing a great role. I finalize with that international experience and the global study of the implementation of UN Resolution 1325 demonstrate that women participation in crisis, in conflict solutions makes the decisions more sustainable and efficient, operative. And when women participate in negotiations, it's also increases the chances of long-lasting peace in 35%. So we also would like our women to be in peace-building process, and Ukraine should benefit from the best international practices in both in the peace process and during the negotiations. Has to be women who will be included in these groups. So that is why I'm sure that it will be much easier for women to defend that prisoners, for example, who are now civil activists or politicians, human rights defenders. So because, for example, in our case, it's more than 1,000 prisoners hostages, and more than 500 of them are women. Because they are women leaders and who have proved their very active position during their many years activity in peaceful times. So that is why, as they say, for the interest of our country, we have to provide all our efforts we can, and also other leaders to release them from Russian prisoners. So here I'd like to say that, as I also have heard previous speakers, we really have a lot of job. And I think that now it's time for international organizations, to show and to demonstrate that they are capable on the practical way, and on practical when we have such time of huge threats and aggression from such countries, not only Russia but others, of course. So I thank you for this opportunity. I'm saying you hello from European Parliament. We are also we are 6 in delegation, and 5 of them are women, and we are fighting on our diplomatic front. And now there is a resolution in European Parliament regarding Russian war crimes against Ukrainian nation. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry that we'll not be able to continue and to listen other speakers, but we will be in touch. And I'd like to thank on behalf also of our organization, Ukrainian Women's Congress, thanks all the speakers and all women who are not disappointed, who are in such very tragic conditions. They continue to fight. And that is why women's role in during war and aggression are very important. Thank you very much, and everything will be fine. We will prevail.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you for your contribution. And I loved this bridge you made from the battlefield you were describing back home in Ukraine, highlighting that there are other battlefields like the parliaments where women have to show a presence, where women have to fight for their presence, for their voice, to be part of delegation and negotiations where decisive decisions will be made for the future of the people in the country and those who had to leave the country. So thank you very much to all of you. My really warm thank you. We have only, I think, 2 minutes left, and I would like to ask Orsala, who is in transit. Yeah, you're still here. That's wonderful. You talked about the the activism has taken a different shape under the current circumstances. And this is a question that's important for all geographies we are talking about today. How has activism changed and how has it impacted women's movements on the ground? I think this is so important. We can see that we need to adapt to the circumstances, and all speakers highlighted under which harsh circumstances women on the ground are operating.
Thank you very much, Edith. Yes, I'm literally a minute away from boarding. Just to answer this question, when I say the nature of the activism doesn't change, its shape changes. That means the commitment, the dedication, the courage of women to raise their voices within their communities and even beyond their communities at a national level is different, because we had operated under different regimes, different forms of governance over the past 40 years, which is the history of Afghanistan's war, nearly my age, a little bit more than my age. And in this whole period, we've seen that how women's struggle have changed, but in the shapes, but not in the nature. And one example of that is that during the former PDPA, like the People's Democratic Party, or the Soviet invasion period, women were put in prison because of their political views opposing the invasion of the USSR. This was one example of women's activism, political activism. During the years of civil war and infightings with different, warlords and mujahideen fightings and so forth, women become active members of NGO communities, non-governmental organizations providing services. To me, that was a struggle for survival. And activism was more to focus on the rights of women to have access to basic services, things like that. Between 2021 and 2001 and 21, 20 years, the activism focused mostly on legal reform, on administration reform, on quotas in the parliament, for example, having the rights or having the possibility of directly getting voted to get full formal representation. So the shape and form was very different, because we suddenly jump into a relatively advanced level of activism by influencing the decision-making, by changing the laws, by drafting the elimination of violence against women law, for example. What I'm trying to say is that post-August last year, all of what we achieved has not completely disappeared. Of course, it is changed. Of course, we have a regime that is not even ready to see me, to have such conversation face to face. I mean, I don't mind, and my organization works. We are building and we are engaging to the level needed to continue our research and our assessment of the situation. But the key point here is that the shape changes, the demands of the people changes on the ground. And it's very important to note that, because the portrait of Afghanistan during the last period of Taliban domination was as if every woman was just locked in their houses without doing anything. But the agency of people, agency of women specifically, is something that is very critical for our broader global understanding of women activism under very severe, challenging situations.
Thank you, Asala. This is a voice of hope. And I think this is an encouragement, and this shows even more the responsibility of donors, of international community, to reach out to you and to work with you, to work where the capacity is, where the commitment is, and where in the end less corruption will happen. So women are so dedicated, to keep civil society going. They have proven that under Taliban 1, keeping society to go together with underground school, underground health services. And now we're talking about the daughters of these women who kept civil society going. So it's in a circle, but the hope is, as you frame it, we are there, and please reach out to us. We will join forces, and we can do it, and we are reliable, we are resilient, we are true leaders. And Nadia, I would like to ask you, Yemen, in the shadow of a raging war, in the shadow of what is happening in Afghanistan, the only country where girls are denied access to education. It's alarming. In the shadow of these current affairs, how do you look at the situation in Afghanistan to
Yemen.
I'm sorry, Yemen, despite Afghanistan, despite what's going on in Ukraine, how can you keep the attention on Yemen? How can you support, support what's necessary in terms of humanitarian crisis, women leadership, women voices, and so on?
Thank you. That's the million-dollar question. So first of all, when I said the world's memory is like a fish memory, so this is the problem. It's the problem also for media, because we jump from one story to the other, one story to the other. There's just so much misery in the world. We are living in a time when there is crisis after crisis after crisis, and the resources are derailed often. So I think to me is just not forgetting that these countries exist just because they have chronic conflicts, like conflict that's been for 10 years, 7 years, that doesn't mean that they're not in conflict anymore. So the idea of documentation is important. The idea of media advocacy is important, and humane stories like reaching out to the communities and talking about the faces behind the suffering. And today, we are hoping to relaunch the Yemen Times, for example. That's going to be a source, hopefully, and we're doing it through community radio and media, so supporting women organizations to speak up, to have their voices, and writing. It has been difficult for me to have an op-ed published in the international organizations, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Independent, all of these big shot newspapers do not want to hear from me. They do not want to hear about women in Yemen. So unfortunately, we'll have to do this in different ways. So what we could do is that raise the issue, talk about it more, do not be silenced, and reach out to women in these countries because they know better. We just need to do this cooperation across countries. And as Ursula and as Maria said, we will prevail.
And I hope to see you at high-level peace negotiation tables as well, Ursula, Nadia, and Maria. This is your place, and there you will demonstrate how you can bring change to your countries, to your communities. I think we have to advocate for that, and this is our responsibility, the responsibility of international community. I think this was an amazing conversation. I feel so privileged, and I learned a lot listening to you. You are true women without borders. You have so much in common. We all have so much in common. So much is at stake. Our stability, our safety across the planet. We all know the planet is at risk, but first we have to fix the doers and the makers. These are the women of the world who have to come together, raise their voice, and continue bringing peace and bringing ideas how to bring peace. I want to say that we have a war raging now, but we need to focus on unarmed contributors at the peace tables, women who are there with ideas how to bring stability, peace, and economic future to their communities. So, as I said, peace starts at home, and we hope that women across their countries, coming from their homes, moving up, having the opportunity to make a difference in the community. So we had very powerful statements, and thank you again very much for giving your time and preparing for this panel. All the best, and hope to see you again, all of you. Bye-bye.